This piece today I'm going to be doing on a stretch canvas, and I've already sketched out my design, which is poppy flowers in a vase just with a pencil. Now you can obviously take this technique and do whatever design that you like. Because I am creating these 3D flowers and also going to be using resin to color this piece in, I'm going to first start off using some textured paste in a little makeshift piping bag. So I'm just using a Ziploc bag. You can also buy disposable piping bags. I would recommend definitely using something disposable because it will be ruined on the inside with the textured paste. I've just cut the tip of my Ziploc bag and I'm going to be piping out my textured paste. Now, if you want to know what the recipe is of the texture paste I use, I'll add a little card, a little link up the top so you can see the video on how I make my textured paste. But really, any sort of texture paste that you like will work fine for this. Then I'm just starting to pipe out following the sketch that I've already got down. Another option when it does come to creating the border of your flowers or your design is you can obviously use hot glue. The reason why I do generally prefer using the texture paste instead is it's just a little bit easier to work with, no chance of burning yourself, and also if you do make a little mistake you can either use a palette knife to just quickly scrape it up or a paintbrush. So I do find the texture paste is an easier item to use with the 3D border. And I feel like I've said texture paste quite a lot already in this video. To make it easier on yourself, if it's your first time trying this technique, I would recommend not doing a design like the one I've done. Doing all of these flowers quite close together, so a bunch of poppy flowers in a vase, it means that I have to be a lot more careful. I can't have my paste too thick because otherwise it's going to go blending into the other flowers and I'm going to lose the detail in my design. So if it is your first time doing it or you don't have the steadiest hand, just go for one big flower or one big item on your canvas instead of a whole bunch of smaller poppy flowers, just because you have to be a lot more cautious and not have the paste borders get too thick because they will then start to go into areas that you don't want. Now I'm also using a paintbrush with just a little bit of water on it to either clean up any mistakes that I make or to help smooth out certain areas of that textured paste. Now the texture paste in the Ziploc bag, while it's in the Ziploc bag, I've got so much time to work with it. So I think it probably took me about half an hour to fully pipe this out. And it is a lot easier as you're going along to fix issues than to let the texture paste set and then try to fix it. So if I do make a little mistake or go over a little area, it's a lot easier to stop, fix that and then go back in, because once the texture paste starts to dry, you won't be able to fix it. You'll have to wait until it fully dries so you can sand it back. So it's a lot easier if you do get a little bit that's sticking out. Just get a paintbrush with a little bit of water and help smooth out any of those more pointed areas of your textured paste. To create the little center of my poppy flowers, I'm just pushing my piping bag in and then pulling it out so that way I get the little peaks and get my little sort of center to my flower, which I think looks really pretty. So once the border has fully dried, this can take anywhere from like an hour to 24 hours, just depending on the temperature of your room. But because I didn't do it too thick, it dried within about 2 hours. I'm just going to go along with this diluted down mixture. So it's the exact same texture paste mixture, but I've just added a bit more water. And I'm going to be going along and just making sure that any sort of cracks or gaps or any areas that need to be smoothed out a little bit more, I'm just going to be applying this all over and kind of helping with the finish a little bit. Because I'm going to be using resin to sort of color this in, I need to make sure that there's no gaps where the resin can pour out and blend into a different area. And then I waited for that to dry, which was another few hours, but you can obviously leave it as long as you want. You could come back the next day. It's not going to affect it anyway. But I'm using some fine grit sandpaper, so I think this was about a 400 grit, and I'm just going over and just smoothing out any areas that are still just that little bit rough. That is also another reason why I do like to use the texture paste over the sort of hot glue method, is because If you don't have areas that are perfect, you can always go back and fix them. It's quite easy to fix this. And because of the mixture that I use, it's really good with sanding. It doesn't sort of crack, it holds its shape really well. So I'm just going back over and making sure everything is nice and smooth before it's time to start doing the resin. Once that's all sanded off, give it a really good dusting, get rid of any of that dust. And I'm just going over and painting everything white just so that texture paste border now blends in with the background. This you don't really need to do because you will be covering it in resin, but I just wanted to do it just to make sure that all the colors look the same throughout and I'm not going to get any variations with the texture paste and the white background. And I'm just using a white acrylic paint to do this. You don't need to use gesso or any sort of primers because resin will be going over the top anyway. Now, when it comes to working with the resin, I'm going to be doing this in 2 stages just to make it so much easier on myself. Resin has a working time, a pot life, and I'm using the epoxy glass resin from Barnes, which has got about half an hour to 40 minutes. And I don't want to be rushing and stressing out or end up wasting a bunch of resin because it sets before I've managed to use it. So I'm going to be doing all of the petals first, all of the flowers first, and then I'm going to be going on and doing the background and the vase, just so that way I'm not racing against the clock trying to use up all of this resin and get it down before it sets. And I know pouring the resin into the flowers is going to be a little bit of time consuming because I want to make sure that I'm only pouring just enough in each sort of section, so that way it fills out but it doesn't overflow into the next section. So I'm pouring a little bit of resin, then using my paddle pop stick and just getting it to kind of start to fill out, go up to the border, seeing if it needs more. It's always better to do less than to add too much and it will overflow, and then you're trying to clean up resin. So for this first poppy, I'm doing a pink and then I'm adding some white a bit closer into the center, because if you've ever seen poppies, they generally will fade from like maybe like a bright orange on the edge of the petal going to like a softer orange in the center. And I'm also adding a little bit of this green and a little bit of the yellow right in the center too for the poppy sort of I guess center of the flower. Now, if you do want to create a design like this, but you've never worked with resin before, you can obviously skip the resin part of this and just paint it with acrylic paint. Or you can go and watch my beginner's guide to resin art. It will give you all of the information you need to know to work on resin to create a piece like this. It's really simplified and it goes into a lot of detail. Because I do a lot of videos with resin, I never know whether you guys, especially if you are long-term viewers, if you would want me to cover the basics in every single video. I don't know if that would annoy some people, seeing all the exact same information again about mixing and colors and how to do all of that, or whether you just like to know that I'm using resin and it's got colors in and this is how I'm using it. So please let me know in the comments below. But if you are brand new and you've never worked with resin before, definitely go and watch that video. Now for this piece, I'm going to be using, I think, 4 different colors to make my poppy flowers. So I've got a red, a yellow, an orange, and a pink. And I'm pretty much doing the same thing, but just using the different colors on each petal, each flower. So for this one, I'm doing red on the outside, and then I'm going to be putting some of the orange resin on the inside and then letting that blend together so I get a little bit of that sort of fading ombre effect. But you can obviously just go for one solid color for each flower. It's completely up to you, but I just thought it would add a little bit of extra detail. So I'm doing that, and then I'm just using my paddle pop stick to blend the 2 colors of resin. And you'll also see here on the pink flower that white has started to blend in, and I'm getting really beautiful, just little hints of that white coming through the pink, making it look quite, I guess, realistic to how a poppy flower looks. Once I completed doing all of the flowers, I then moved on and mixed up a new batch of resin, and for the vase I just colored it in like this sort of sandy beige color, and then I'm just going to be doing a white background. And it did take me quite a while to kind of get all of those flowers really beautifully blended out with my paddle pulp stick, so I'm really glad I didn't do one big batch of resin and instead I split it into these 2 steps, especially too because I did drip a few of the colored resin onto the background and I was able to just wipe it off, but if I had put white down, then that would have just been a little bit painful to get that off. So definitely made my life a lot easier doing the flowers, letting those set, and then going back in with a new batch of resin to do the rest. Something else that's really important is when you are doing your sort of 3D flowers with the texture paste, you do need to make sure that you've got a decent height to the texture paste, because obviously you don't want to do it really thin, and then when you add the resin, it's able to just pour over. You need to have a little bit of height to your sort of petals or your shapes, so that way it acts as a sort of border for each of the resin colors so they don't just pour out. Now my textured outline, I'm going to be using gold leaf to just finish this piece off, but you could obviously just paint it if you don't want to do that step. But I do find sometimes that gold leaf can stick to resin really easily. So one of the tips, and this works every single time, is just put some baby powder down all over the resin, so that way the gold leaf cannot stick to the piece at all. It will only stick to the areas you put glue. If you've ever worked with gold leaf and resin, sometimes it will just stick for no reason, even if there's no glue in that area. And that generally happens because the resin might still have a little bit of tackiness. So another really helpful tip too is give your resin a good few days to set. Don't just wait for it to be cured. Give it a few days for it to really fully harden and set, and it will lose that tackiness. So don't do it too soon. So I'm going along with my gold leaf glue. So it's called Gold Leaf Size. This is a water base, and I'm just using a small paintbrush and painting that over all of the textured paste areas, and that way when I apply my gold leaf, it's going to adhere to those areas and I'm going to get a really beautiful border. Now I'm using a water-based gold leaf glue that you can get from pretty much every art store, and I'm just going to be using imitation gold leaf for this one, which once again you can get from nearly every art store. So the great thing about using a water-based one is it means that my paintbrushes are not going to get ruined. So as long as I wash my paintbrush out in water straight away after I finish using it, not giving the glue time to set, I'll be able to keep reusing this paintbrush again and again. And then you want to let the glue get tacky. You don't want to apply the gold leaf straight away. You need that glue to get tacky. So this is a really slow setting glue, and that's why it's used for this. And the reason behind it being so slow setting is because it will give you time to apply all of the gold leaf before it does fully start to set. So it took about half an hour for this to get to the right stage that I could then start adding my gold leaf on. If you do it too early, you can find that the gold leaf will move around and it won't just adhere straight away. So you definitely need to be patient and let that glue get tacky before starting to apply. Otherwise, you'll find that when you go to push it in, it will just rip because the gold leaf is so fine. Once I fully got my gold leaf down, then with a soft bristle brush, I just like to use that to sort of push in all of that gold leaf into the glue. This technique is called burnishing, and it just makes sure that every single area that I've got the glue has some of that gold leaf. Then I use that same brush just to start to remove that excess. I like to use this because I find it doesn't damage the gold leaf, but it pushes it in and removes all of the excess really easily. Some other people apply gold leaf in different ways, different techniques, but I find this is the easiest method for me. Another tip when you are working with any of the leaves is just know when you do start to brush away that excess, because it is so fine and light, it's going to start floating around and it will spread out and go absolutely everywhere. So either do this outside or do it in a space where you don't care if you find gold leaf for weeks to come, because it will float around and be up in the air and land on all your shelves, and you just keep finding it for weeks and weeks to come. So I'm doing this in my studio space, which is fine because I don't care if it is covered in gold leaf, but definitely don't do this in the middle of your house. And this is the finished piece. I absolutely love using the texture paste and resin together to create this artwork. And I can, if I want to, go along and do a top coat of resin just to lock everything in and give it extra protection.